Grace and peace. Welcome to Judah's Word Domestic Violence Awareness Initiative YouTube channel. I'm your host, Apostle Cheryl. Now, before we get started, I'm going to give you a few seconds. Check down here below the video. Make sure you subscribe if you've not done so already. And then click the bell for notifications, and you'll receive a notice every time we upload a new video, which is typically on Sunday afternoons at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. Now, thank you for taking time to address that. Listen, we're going to continue with our series about what is your conflict resolution style. Last week, we looked at 2 of the 5 styles that we've identified. And this week, we're going to look at 2 more. Okay, well, let's do a quick recap in case you haven't watched the other videos. And if you haven't, I encourage you to go back and do so. All right. Conflict. Let's start with defining what conflict is. Conflict is to come into collision or disagreement, to be contradictory or in opposition, especially prolonged struggle or strife. A conflict is a fight, a battle, or a struggle, and it also means to clash, okay, which denotes some intensity in the disagreement, all right? It's not just a passive disagreement. Okay, and then resolution is defined as the act of determining upon an action, a course of action, a method, or procedure. A resolution is the act of determining upon an action, course of action, method, or procedure. And so when we're talking about conflict resolution, in a very broad sense, we're talking about the formal or informal process that 2 or more parties engage in to find a peaceful solution to their dispute. Okay, so if it's truly conflict resolution, it's not about assigning guilt or blame. It's not about determining who's right and who's wrong. And if that's the most important thing, then the conflict will not be resolved because both parties are probably committed to their perception of what's real regarding the disagreement in the first place. Okay, so the goal of constructive conflict resolution, again, is not to determine who's right or who's wrong, but to try to work through it, okay? To try to work through it. So now we've referenced the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument, and we've identified, according to this instrument, 5 conflict resolution styles. And we want you to understand that we all have one that we tend to gravitate to instinctively without even thinking about it. And it informs how we navigate life, how we address conflict, whether it's a little small conflict or whether it's a great big huge conflict, but it informs how we respond and what our position is and what our posture is, okay? And the 5 conflict resolution styles that we're addressing in this series are collaborating, competing, avoiding, accommodating, and compromising. Now, in last week's video, we've talked about collaborating and competing. And in this week's video, we're going to compare and contrast avoiding and accommodating, okay? Again, there's no set in stone right or wrong answer, right or wrong responses. It's more about what's more appropriate given the circumstances and what the real goals are, okay? Now, a few things that we shared in the previous video is that it's important, we've learned, to be able to identify what the outcome is that we desire when we are embroiled in a conflict. What is the outcome that we desire? And then why do we honestly desire it? Why do we honestly desire it? Do we desire it just because, or do we have a foundational reason for why we desire it? And then what is the most important thing about what we desire? And everything can't be the most important thing. What is the most important thing regarding your conflict? Why is it so important to you? Okay. And as we stated previously, the process that we choose to resolve a conflict is as important as the conflict itself. It can't be a setup. It can't be, those who are brought into the discussion to help resolve the conflict have strong bias in one direction or the other. Okay. So we are going to talk about avoiding and accommodating in this video. Okay. Avoiding avoiding. Those who avoid conflict tend to be both unassertive and uncooperative. Those who avoid conflict tend to be both unassertive and uncooperative. And a lot of times they'll do this while they're pretending to be cooperative, okay, which frankly is a challenge for me. Okay, it is. It makes my eye twitch for real. They will diplomatically sidestep an issue or simply withdraw from a situation that they perceive as threatening or uncomfortable. This only works typically if the timing is off. And by that, I mean that this is not the appropriate time to address the conflict, or there is no concern about the outcome. So avoiding is appropriate when you don't care about the outcome one way or the other, um, or when it's not the right time or setting to address the conflict. So, an example of that might be if you're out with a friend and they get into an argument with someone, an inappropriate, ineffective maybe would be a better word. An ineffective response would be um, to then engage in an argument with them about the fact that they're arguing with someone else, right? Because that would just make things worse. And it would create a public spectacle and just blow things out of proportion. So it might be appropriate to just kind of step back and let them resolve their differences. So I'm going to repeat that. Those who avoid conflict, those people who this is their go to, because we all have a go to that we instinctively engage in when we are confronted with conflict, they tend to be both unassertive and uncooperative, okay? Um, and they'll diplomatically sidestep. They will disavow all knowledge. They will simply withdraw, go radio silent, get hush mouth, and all those other descriptors. And this is appropriate when there's no concern about the outcome, one way or the other, or when the timing is just the setting or whatever is just completely inappropriate. Another example would be if you're on your job and you're in a meeting with the CEO of your company or whatever, and they share a position that you don't agree with, disagreeing with them in front of the whole entire staff might not be wise. So you might want to avoid a conflict in that setting, and you may choose to address it privately. Okay. So there are times when avoiding is appropriate, and there are times when it is decidedly unhelpful and may actually just make things worse. Okay. Now, accommodating. Accommodating is the opposite of competing. There is an element of self sacrifice when accommodating to satisfy the other party. Okay. It on the surface seems to be generous. It can, however, be used to take advantage of the weaker individual and can then cause resentment. This is effective when you don't care about the outcome, but want to preserve or build the relationship. So, accommodating is the opposite of competing. And there's an element of self sacrifice, as I've previously stated, when accommodating to satisfy the other parties, basically allowing them to have their way. And it can seem generous at first blush, but in the long run, it can cause resentment, and it can really put one party in a position where they can take advantage of another party because they just simply always get their way. Okay. Um, this is effective when you don't care about the outcome, when the outcome doesn't matter. And then when the most important thing is to preserve the relationship, okay, then you accommodate. Now, what does this have to do with domestic violence? Well, for a victim whose primary concern is the marriage, the relationship, the partnership, no matter the quality, then there's a tendency to accommodate really the abuse, to acquiesce to it, um, to feel like the best thing to do is to just like keep your mouth closed and don't say anything and just go along with it and let them have what they want. Um, the problem with this, as I just stated, is that the person who then is viewed as weaker in the relationship or the partnership can be really, really taken advantage of. Okay. Okay. So we've talked about avoiding and we've talked about accommodating. These are two conflict resolution styles. We've talked about the pros and the cons of each. It's important to identify what your go to conflict resolution style is so that you can make adjustments to it depending on the circumstances that you find yourself in or the conflict that you find yourself um, a party to. All right. Remember that the purpose of constructive conflict resolution is not to assign blame. And after we are able to identify what the most important thing is for us, what is the outcome that we desire, what is important about what we desire, and do we absolutely have to have everything that we think that we desire? All right. Once we can determine if it's the relationship that's important or the outcome that's important, we can make better decisions about how to respond when we come upon conflict in our day to day lives. This is Apostle Cheryl with Judah's Word Domestic Violence Awareness Initiative. Thank you for spending time with us today. It is our prayer that this series is helpful to you as you move through your day to day life and your relationships with others. You be safe out there. Blessings to you.